This is Alexis McKenzie, and I did my project on college students in mental health. The purpose of my project was to find a correlation between a college student's mental health in relation to stress and what college brings, and I asked questions discussing what they do outside of school and which periods of school is the most stressful and how sleep can affect it. Along with this, I used my hypothesis statements in order to determine whether or not we would reject the null hypothesis. Determining a sample size number was a little bit more difficult for me because if I wanted to base it off of other people's data and research that I had done, it was going to be 539 people. And if I was to use a bigger confidence level and a smaller margin error, such as 90% and 5, I would have had 345 sample size. And I knew that was going to be really difficult to get that many people to take my survey. So the final sample size that I got down to was 34, and I got this by using a confidence level of 85% and a margin error of 10. And luckily I did this because my total number of respondents was only 37. The first hypothesis statement that I tested was the mean of students who responded to the survey stated that they have experienced mental health problems during school was greater than half. For this, our null hypothesis was equal to 0.50, so 50%, and our alternative was that it was greater than 50%. For this, I used a significance level of 0.05. A z-score for this test that I got was 18.22, and my p-value was 0. So from this, I saw that there is sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, so the mean of students who responded to the survey stated that they have experienced mental health problems during school actually was greater than half. The next hypothesis statement that I tested was that the proportion of hours that students work is greater than the proportion of hours that students study outside of class. For this, my null hypothesis was the hours worked by students is equal to the hours studied outside of class by students. And my alternative was the hours worked was greater than the hours studying outside of class, which is what we were rooting for. The significance level was 0.05, and the z-score that I got from this test was negative 7.37, and my p1 minus p2 was equal to negative 0.15. So from this test, I found that there is sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, so we can accept the alternative hypothesis, which is what we are rooting for. And this means that the claim that the proportion of hours that students work is greater than the proportion of hours that students study outside of class is accurate. The next hypothesis statement that I tested was that there is a linear correlation between a college student's mental health and the timing of finals during school. For this, my null hypothesis was that there was no correlation, and the alternative was that there was a correlation. From this test, I found that my z-score was 16.71 and my p-value was 0. From this, I could find that there is sufficient evidence to reject the null, so we can accept the alternative hypothesis, which is what we are rooting for. And this means that there is a linear correlation between college students' mental health and the timing of finals during school. The graph here shows the different time frames throughout the college term, and I used the beginning of term, midterms, and finals, and I asked which was most stressful for students and which times they felt mentally drained. And by this demonstration, you can see that everybody chose finals, which is kind of like an obvious thing, I believe, because that's when I'm the most stressed out, at least. But I was surprised by how many people actually said the beginning of the term, because I figured it'd be like nobody, because that's usually the easiest time, in my opinion. For the next hypothesis statement that I wanted to test, I wanted to see what was the reasoning for a lot of students' mental health problems. And for this, I gave the option of school, work, sports, or other. And from this, I wanted to see if that the reason for students' mental health problems do not occur in the same frequency. So the null hypothesis was that all of them did occur in the same frequency, and the alternative was that they did not. The degrees of freedom for this problem was 3, and the p-value was 0.352. And because the p-value is less than the significance level of 0.05, we will reject the null hypothesis. This means that we can accept the alternative hypothesis, which is what we are rooting for, so the reason for students' mental health problems do not occur in the same frequency. The pie chart that is shown here is what I used for my last hypothesis statement, and I asked all the students what was the reasoning for their mental health problems if they had any, and this included the options of school, sports, work, or other, and I also did I do not apply, but I didn't put that in this graph. And the school is very overwhelmingly over half, it's almost at 70%, and the next biggest one was other, and then it went to work, and then it went to sports, but we also did not have a lot of people who were student athletes. So you can see here that school does have a big factor in students' mental health, and that it needs to be more of a focus. The final hypothesis statement that I wanted to test was that the standard deviation of students' mental health ratings during school is equal to the standard deviation of students' mental health ratings when they are not in school. So for this, my null hypothesis was that the standard deviations were equal to each other. My alternative, which we are rooting for, was that they were not equal to each other. For this, I found that the f-stat was 0 and the p-value was 1, and the standard deviation for the first rating during school was 1.96 and outside of school was 3.83. When I say outside of school, I am meaning during breaks or on summer or when they took like a gap year. By doing this test, I found that there is sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis, so we accept the alternative, which is what we are rooting for. So this means that the two standard deviations are not equal to each other. By testing my hypothesis statements, I was able to see that there is a correlation between students' mental health in relation to their stress and pressure that college can bring. And I thought this was really important because I found it really interesting when I was researching topics and seeing how poorly some students' mental health were rated. And through all the tests that I had shown, we can see that there ones that we were rooting for, which happened to always be the alternative, was the hypothesis that we had accepted. So this to me means that there is a poor college health, mental health for students that's going on, and that we should be more aware of it. Some of the challenges and limitations for this project were kind of interesting because throughout class I thought that I was understanding the material and that it had really good survey questions fit for what we were going to be doing and good hypothesis statements, but when it came to testing them for the chapters 8 through 12 that we did, I felt like my questions weren't accurately fit, and I don't know if that's because we kind of did them a little bit earlier than we finished the chapter, but I did struggle with some of the questions that were like the 2 sample questions, like from chapter 9, and it wasn't like a big stop because I was able to research it and go back to our notes and look at it and stuff, so that did help. I also had to spend more time researching the ANOVA test for the last chapter because I felt like I didn't fully understand that material either, and that could just be on me, but going back through our notes did help with that. And another challenge and limitation that I experienced was having such a small sample size. And initially I did want a bigger sample size, but I'm glad that I didn't because I know that I wouldn't have been able to reach that goal of that many respondents because I barely got 3 over what I was wanting to get, which was 34, and I only got 37, and the one that I was about to go with was 345. Aside from this, I think the project went pretty well and I was able to do it and learn a lot about this class and stuff and everything that we went through this term from chapters 8 through 12.